Justin, that was, if we could bottle that and do that every time, that was fantastic. Just a, joy to talk to Beckie. Not every day you get to talk to an Olympic gold medalist. But then just to see what drives her to make an impact in this world, to do hard things in the midst of extreme pushback and challenge, especially in a culture that I think, quite honestly, these days, that virtue is lacking, where people don't want to stand up for the things that she's chosen to stand up for because it's hard. And so instead of taking a back seat, she got into the game. And it was inspiring, very interesting, and exciting to talk to her.
Yeah. She was just as authentic as I've ever seen a person before. Just real conversation. Yeah. Gold medalist, silver medalist, competed in 3 Olympics for Canada. Officer of the Order of Canada. She's in about 4 or 5 Hall of Fames. And at the same time, here she is, a girl from Northern Alberta, a small town, who just said, actually, I wasn't very special. I wasn't actually a gifted or skilled athlete. I just worked hard. She was able to be resilient. Interesting thread came up again, right? This athlete who competed across Alberta, won cross-country skiing races, as she continued to transition to the next level, made the World Cup team of skiing and struggled 60th and 70th placed finishes. And was just trying to hone in, and a lot of athletes were quitting probably in that scenario. And she just talked about being resilient and never questioning if she should quit or not, but painful. She talked just the pain that she experienced and the failure and the losses. And I think that's just a really important message that there's a lot talked about today. We talked about doping and clean sport and fair competition and courage and integrity and being able to stand up in the face of peer pressure. But the one piece for any young athlete listening just needs to really pull out that, she tried to hone in on everything, including, nutrition and sleep and workouts. And it was a sports psychologist that actually gave her the edge. Took her from 60th and 70th place finishes to becoming a gold medalist, the biggest stage in Salt Lake City. Again, this inner game, lots of stuff going on. Not once did she, although it was talked about, think that doping would be a good idea for her career, to get an edge in the sport, even though she found out in 2001 that there was a whole team from Finland.
Yes.
Suspended for doping.
Yeah. You see an injustice in the world. You see something where you want to see a change. You need somebody to stand up for something. Well, instead of looking around, the people to your left and right or wherever, well, why not you? Why not you to take that stand? Why not you to have a voice? Why not you to, like she said, she was very ordinary.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to go for it, she said.
Ordinary people can do extraordinary things.
It was an awesome conversation. Yeah, look forward to more of those. Joining us in today's podcast is Beckie Scott, former Olympian, participating in 3 Olympics, 1998 in Nagano, 2002 in Salt Lake City, and 2006 in Turin. She's a cross-country skier with both a gold medal and a silver medal to her name. She's been named as an officer of the Order of Canada. She's been inducted into 5 Sports Hall of Fames. She's sat on the IOC Athlete Committee on Anti-Doping, and then she served as an executive with WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. She spent a career fighting for fair play in sport and clean play in sport. And now she's even founded Spirit North in 2017, the CEO of Spirit North. It's a charitable organization dedicated to improving health, wellness, and education outcomes for Indigenous youth through equitable access to sport and play. It started with one community. She's grown it to 130 and over 16,000 participating youth. We're excited to have Beckie on the Grit and Growth podcast today. Well, Beckie, welcome to the Grit and Growth podcast. We are really thrilled to have yourself, a decorated Olympian, as well as a CEO of a nonprofit and working in this game of sport, join our podcast today.
Thank you, Justin. It's great to be here.
For our listeners' sake, maybe if you could just give us a brief overview of how your journey through sport, from youth to Olympian, how did that kind of happen? And I want to hear that story first. I know you're an Alberta girl and, grew up, I believe, cross-country skiing, and that's what, fell in love with that sport.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in just a very small community in northeastern Alberta, little town called Vermilion. My mom and dad were actually the founding members of the Vermilion Nordic Ski Club, so they were already into cross country skiing when I was very young, and it was I would say just a very natural, organic kind of introduction to sport, and through that, a connection to community, to the outdoors, to active, healthy living, and it really just blossomed from there. So competition was a natural next step. They were both into it themselves as well, so we would travel around Alberta, do the Alberta Cup circuit, and that's where I think, first developed a love for competition as well, because I really just saw it is such an inspirational environment. I love the people. I love the idea that the harder you tried, the better you could do at something. And so it just, I would say at a very young age, I was totally inspired and enthused by the idea of becoming an athlete, an Olympian, and then I think there was this piece as well. Like my dad was a huge sports enthusiast, so we, would watch. I think it was CBC Sports Saturday at the time, every weekend together, and that was also, I would say, really foundational, just to this kind of concept of like, wow, that is a possible pathway and opportunity for a profession. So that's where it all started.
And neat on the intrinsic motivation side. I think you hit on that. You found in sport and in competition that it was correlated that actually the harder you tried or the more effort or the practice you put in could result in a better outcome for you. So that it obviously drove you to become exceptional at what you did and chose to do with cross country. Uh,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
and children of your own now. You have a few children yourself, or two. How many kids do you have that are also becoming athletes and probably spending time on the mountain?
Yeah, I have two teenagers. The one is 14 and one is 17, and they are both into sport and actually into cross country skiing themselves. We like to think we gave them a choice, but they do it and they seem to love it. And I think I appreciate it almost more now as a parent, the role of sport in society than I ever did as an athlete, because seeing them and the growth and the connections that they're making, the importance of, being a teammate and feeling that feelings of inclusion and belonging, and how they are striving to meet their own potential, and the correlations they are themselves making between hard work and effort, and how that translates into results.
Well, and Becky, I'm curious too. Like you talked about developing a love for competition, and through your father and watching CBC on the weekends and stuff like that. So how does one become an Olympic athlete, and when did it start for you, starting to crystallize a little bit? Like, hey, I can do this. I could be those athletes I'm watching on Saturday on CBC. I can become one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was a very long process. So, it
Hmm.
started probably as a child, very young. And then I think I was about 13 when I made the Alberta ski team. And that's when, it starts to become a little more serious and a little more intentional about training, and the next step, which was then the World Juniors, and the next step, which is then, the national team. And the next step, which is then racing onto the World Cup. So it's a step-by-step process over time, over years, in fact. So, it was from the age of probably 13 to 20 before I began to actually race the World Cup circuit. And at that point, then really set my sights on the next step, which was the Olympics. But I would say, at that point, like the early years of racing the World Cup with the Canadian national team were very, very challenging, very discouraging at times, because it was so hard. It was just intensely competitive, the depth of field at the World Cup, and it's as it still is, but it just wasn't what I had prepared for. I guess it took me years and years of overcoming sort of adversity and challenges and major failures and major disappointments to finally get to the Olympics.
I think there's lots to talk about this in sport, about this transition period for young athletes when they move from one team like a Team Alberta to then competing for that national World Cup circuit. And you obviously experienced a lot of failure in it, as you just said, and just just how challenging that field of play was compared to what, the previous level you came from, and what kind of things would you, for young athletes out there who are struggling with issues of getting to that next level or finding their competitive advantage, maybe they're coming up short of the mark and just not qualifying or anything. What advice can you offer them from some of those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a lot to be said for some of the old cliches, which are, that nothing worth doing um, is easy, and that you will run into hard times and challenging times, and it will be very, very difficult. And the test is how you deal with that, and how if you do decide to walk away, if you do decide to quit, or you do decide to pick yourself up again and keep trying. And so there's a lot to be said for resilience, for grit, the name of the show. But it for me, I think, particularly because I wasn't necessarily a naturally talented athlete. I didn't have this great pool of athletic talent that I was drawing on. It really was about how much I wanted to keep going, and how prepared I was to accept that this was going to take time, and I just had to figure out how to do it. It was going to be very hard. So I think there was a tremendous amount of just determination, pure determination, in those early years, for sure.
And what influence, like you said, your parents were instrumental in that. So did they foster that dealing with adversity, dealing with failure, but to keep on going?
Yeah, I think they did. They were absolutely supportive, but they always said, if you're going to do something, do it well. Like, don't do it halfway. And if this is your chosen profession, then you do everything you can to be successful in that profession. And it's not a hobby, it's not a side gig, it's what you've chosen to do. So do it well. And that, I really took that to heart as well. Just trying to figure out, it was, trying to crack the code of what is it that makes an athlete successful in this sport, and get to that level. And so I was looking at everything from, nutrition to technique to physiology. And I think ultimately what really made the difference was sports psychology. Like, I ended up working with an excellent sports psychologist who really was transformative in how to approach things. And I think that's when real change started to happen for me anyway.
Neat. We've read lots about your career, Beckie, and winning the medals that you've won for Canada. And I know a big piece of your career has been just statements that you've done by sticking a flag in the snow, let's call it, instead of the stand. But just in regards to like the subject of fair play and how important fair play and integrity in sport is. And when did that, your journey through sport, when did that become a real highlight piece for you, that you started to see that as, fair play is important, and athletes, and particularly athletes, can compete clean and need to?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it was definitely an evolution. When I first came into the sport of cross country skiing, like I said, I was in my 20 years old, and it was so hard. Like, it was, I was finishing in the 60s and 70s sometimes in the races, and just looking at the results and going, how do I do this? Like, how do I become successful in the sport? It was already such a difficult sport. So, and there was this, this mindset that you had to stay with it. It was going to take time, and it was going to just be this massive effort of perseverance and determination. But there were also a lot of rumors at the time circulating about the amount of drug use and performance enhancing drug use going on in our sport. And so that was daunting, I would say, but we never had real confirmation of it. Like, it was always just sort of this background rumor mill happening. And then in 2001, at the World Championships in Lahti in Finland, almost the entire Finnish team had been cut for doping. And that really sparked in me, I think, this profound sense of injustice, because we were trying so hard. The sport was already so difficult. It was already so challenging to get to any measure of success. And here it was confirmed that people were absolutely cheating and doping, and that's why they were successful. So that was that was the first time I started to become vocal about it. That's when I spoke up. We circulated a petition. I wrote a letter to the World Anti-Doping Agency, And then in 2002, I was impacted directly, personally by it. When I won a bronze medal, it was then upgraded to silver and gold over the next 2.5 years. And then it really became then it got very personal.
It did. It got personal. And, we have a lot of questions and we want to ask more about that. But I just need to say that as a father of a couple young girls, to see yourself as a Canadian Olympian and a role model to a lot of us, but especially to young females, just to have the courage to stand up for yourself and for justice in that moment, and to kind of dig into that and call that out, because those are your peers, and that isn't easy in the world of peer pressure and these days. And so, thank you for being that role model for our young athletes, and for standing up for integrity in sport in that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I will say I wasn't alone. Like, I was definitely supported by my own teammates, my own coaches, and support staff. Like, everybody on our team felt very strongly about it and very passionately about it, because we were all united in this collective effort to be a successful team internationally. And we were all being thwarted by these by what was going on in the sport. It's as damaging to a coach as it is to an athlete, because the coach is investing just as much time and effort and energy into an athlete's career as an athlete sometimes. And so everybody on our team was impacted. But I had the platform because I, had won this medal. And so I decided to use that platform and take a position publicly, because we all felt so strongly about it.
Beckie, I remember back, and the first name that comes to mind is Ben Johnson. And so, I'm 9 years old watching the Olympics, and, can still see him running across the finish line with his hand up, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that was like the first time I remember being, thinking about, steroids, like what's this, right? And then I became a Division I baseball player in college, and that was the first time I actually saw it in my teammates. Guys would come back after the summer, their arms and upper body were about twice the size as they were literally, and I'd just seen them 10 weeks before, and they just were massive and just hitting rockets during batting practice, that kind of stuff. And so I'm just curious, like in that, and I remember back then having guys say, "Hey, do you want to try it?" And I was like, "No, I don't." But at the same time, it kind of in the back of your mind, you're like, well, maybe it would give me an edge. Maybe I would get more playing time. Was it maybe offered, or was it ever a thought in the back of your mind, like, hey, if I actually want to have a chance at being at the top of my sport, I might have to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is one that I got, I would say pretty routinely, particularly after Salt Lake City, when it all started to come out how much doping was happening in our sport. And the short answer is really no. And the reason is because I was never asked. It was never an option on our team, in our team culture. It just was never even a consideration or an option that was presented. So, and in fact, I think people, of course, in your mind, you're going, well, it's so unfair, and how can I compete if I'm not? But at the same time, it was just never even put out there as a viable option. So it wasn't something that we ever considered. And why wasn't it an option? Honestly, I think the culture of our sport in Canada too. I think that there's different. And we've seen this a lot in different sports. Like, there's just a different approach to sport culturally, and this in Canada, as in many other countries around the world. But there is a sense of the importance of fair play and doing things with integrity, with honesty, accountability, transparency. All of that is really important. And there would be, I think, deep shame, deep embarrassment, deep humiliation to be caught doing something corrupt, like cheating or doping, to improve your athletic performance. It just wasn't the way we would do things.
Yeah, so team culture is a big reason, and I think that probably leads into this, question I had is, what kind of role do coaches or management of sporting organizations play in enforcing ethics in sport?
Huge. And, and so big that in a number of years ago, quite a few years ago, the World Anti-Doping Agency actually introduced sanctions for members of an athlete's entourage, because there's this recognition that it's actually very rare for an athlete to act alone. And that, and if you look at the time or the age of most athletes, they're young, they're vulnerable, they're at an age in their life or a time in their life when they really are focused on succeeding and doing everything it takes. And if someone comes to them that they trust, that they admire, respect, and says, this is going to help you, the influential nature of the entourage around an athlete cannot be overstated. And that's why it's really important. That athletes recognize that, first of all, and that the entourage around an athlete is operating with integrity.
Yeah, that's good. And a really, good word of caution to parents as well, that we still stay engaged with our young athletes, even if they're 18 or 19 and moving into the professional ranks. It's, there's a lot of money in this world of professional sports these days, and it's easy to say you can get paid more or anything else if you do X. And it's but I think there's a lot at stake, isn't there, for sport, if when it comes to clean competition and just fairness in sport oversight. I think you've seen that. You mentioned the WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and you had a role for a number of years. And I can't remember if it was six years that you spent with the WADA.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe tell us a little bit about what got you involved there? And I know it wasn't easy. I think it took a tremendous toll on yourself and even your family through that time.
Yeah. How long do we have? Well, obviously, my first, again, my first point of contact with WADA was my own personal experience. So that happened to me as an athlete in 2002. And then when I retired in 2006, I was elected to the International Olympic Committee's Athlete Commission. And from there, began engaging and interfacing with WADA as a member of their executive board, and then eventually was tapped on the shoulder to lead their athlete committee. So I did that for 6 years, and really, saw, I think, the role of geopolitics and the business of sport, how influential that is at that level. And I saw, again, a huge transformation at WADA. So when I first came into WADA, it was led and governed by people who were there on the basis of holding an institution on principle. So really there to fight for clean sport, to level the playing field, and to ensure. And I think there's another aspect to anti-doping that we don't often talk about, but it's the health of athletes, like the health risks to athletes, because we talked about, they're so young, they're so easily influenced, they're so easily manipulated at times by, powerful, influential members of entourage. They don't necessarily understand the health risks either. So we have a moral obligation, I think, to these young athletes to ensure that the rules around anti-doping are held, if nothing else, then for their health, and to make sure that they're not putting themselves at extreme risk sometimes. Beyond that, the leveling the playing field. But so when I first entered WADA, it was definitely a place where I felt like there could be progress. The athlete voice was important. And this was an institution really founded and grounded in principles, and those were so integral to sport. And then, over time, that shifted with new leadership, with the increased influence of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and really moved towards supporting, I would say, the business of sport. So a lot of that changed. And the athlete committee, which I was leading, was not on board with those changes, and was in fact, in many instances, in direct confrontation and challenging those changes in particular. And you would know this, like when the Russian doping scandal emerged in 2014 through to 2016 and beyond, like it just went on and on. But those were the first years of it. And that's when all of those tensions and divides and fractures really started to emerge.
Right.
Well, and Beckie, just again, thinking of, doping like all this stuff going on. I don't I don't recall hearing about it as much. It seemed like it was talked about a whole lot more, when you were competing. And lately, it seems like it's not talked. I get there's a few documentaries out there. You got Icarus, you got these other ones out there. Um, and so I just don't know if there's the awareness around it. I know my student athletes, I'm a college basketball coach. We have to take like basically a little test every year to make sure we're aware of the rules, but that's about it. Uh, do you see it as a is the problem still the same? Is it bigger? Is it less? Are we just not aware of it? Are we not hearing about it? Or like you said, with these changes in WADA, is it just not talked about as much?
Yeah, I think you're asking a really important question because I think it is still there. It's as prevalent as ever. And the reason we're not hearing about it as much and talking about it as much is by design. It is not.
Mhm.
It's not good for sport. It's not good for sponsors. It doesn't attract TV viewers to know that these great champions crossing the finish line might be doped, or maybe. And so I think that there has been a real effort to push that conversation out of the mainstream, and to ensure that this idealized version of sport that we all love and want to believe in is kept intact. And I think the other element to that too is a little bit of fatigue. Like, it was starting to be like, another athlete's tested positive, another athlete's tested positive. Well, what are we supposed to believe in? Like, who is legitimate and who isn't? And I think those two factors combined have really pushed it out of out of the collective conversation. And that's unfortunate because it is still prevalent. It is still happening. It is still undermining and eroding the sport as a whole. And it needs to be challenged.
So, what actions, can we take today? Shane and I both sit in positions where we do get to work with younger athletes, college and high school age, but others, parents, what messages can we be sending to young athletes that can steer them towards competing clean?
I mean, I think what you're doing is great because you're keeping the conversation alive. Like Shane said, it seems to not be as prevalent anymore, as not as like it was. And I think we have to keep the conversation alive. We have to um, we have to make young athletes aware that people do care. It is important that they are approaching their sport with the mindset of this is a contest of best efforts. And if I am cheating, it is completely undermining the whole principle of the concept of sport. Like, it just doesn't, it makes it illegitimate in a way. And you might get the fanfare and the accolades and the commercial revenue that comes with success in the sport, but that's not what sport is about at the end of the day. And and it's not really the life lessons that you should be walking away with when you're done your career. So I think it's really just important to keep the conversation alive, and keep talking to young athletes about it, and make sure that they know and understand the value of sport, like why we admire athletes who are successful, why they become role models to younger athletes, and what is it about them that makes them valuable in our collective conscious.
Well, and I wonder where would you say is the starting point for this conversation? Because I think I read something the other day about, there was this hypothetical study done, and they were saying to student athletes, if you could take this performance enhancing drug and it would guarantee that you would, I think it was when the Olympics were on or something like that, it would guarantee you a gold medal, but you would die in 10 years. And, so like your life would be over before you're 40 or 35 or whatever it is. And overwhelmingly, I don't know what the number was, but overwhelmingly the people asked said, yes, I would do it. And so for me, I'm like, that's not just a problem with, sporting culture, it's just our culture in general. And so like, where does this education or being extremely intentional of just messaging to our kids start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think like everything around sport, the messaging starts at home. It really has to start with parents at the kitchen table, and just reinforcing the value of sport and the value to you personally, but also to the bigger picture societally. And then it spreads out to schools and, and teams and sports, the sport environment. But it has to be threaded through all of this, that the value of sport is really in the contest of best efforts. As I said, that it is not in the success piece. It is in the journey. It's in the process. It's in the lessons learned. It's in the life skills that come out of it. It's in the connections that you make to your potential, to your community, to your teammates. And that's what, and I think if you talk to most Olympic champions or people who have had great success in their sport, later on in their life, they will not tell you that it was the podiums or the medals that were the most meaningful element of their sporting careers to them. It was these moments of pure connection to teammates or really discovering your own potential. And when you take drugs or you cheat or you completely, subvert that process, you've missed out on an entire element of sport, which may end up being the most important piece of all for you. So yeah, that's what I would start with.
Yeah, so focusing on those virtues that we can gain from sport, the teamwork, the camaraderie, those lifelong relationships, the lessons that you learned through the adversity you experienced, and just being able to pursue excellence, but recognize that as you put in effort, you might fail, but as you continue to persevere, you could get the results, right? And then that can prove something to you, that as you get older and you have children, you go, wow, this is really hard, but I bet if I am intentional here, that this will be great. I'll have a great relationship with my children. Or anything in life you can learn from sport, right, in so many ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I agree. I think I couldn't imagine having potentially medaled, and knowing that I cheated, and just living with that the rest of your life would be difficult.
Well, I mean, for sure. And I think the other element is that, it is possible to be successful without doping and cheating. And you're talking to someone who was, and I know many others who are. And so that's the beautiful piece in all of this, is that it is possible and absolutely doable. And there's no reason why you shouldn't try, because you may discover things about yourself you never knew. And those things you discover will carry on with you for the rest of your life and be, some of the most incredibly powerful guiding forces that you can draw on for the rest of your life. So absolutely believe in what's possible, and don't feel the temptation to take a shortcut and cheat, because that just may get you the short-term success, but never the long-term lessons and life skills that you would learn or develop through the process.
Well, and I'm wondering, did you ever have any conversations, you're competing, you're traveling for years on tour against, I'm guessing, against the same competition for quite a while, and you get to know these other ladies, develop some relationship. Was there ever a time where some of the athletes, I'm thinking like maybe the two competitors that were caught and you got your gold medal, conversations with them later on of maybe regret, or it wasn't worth it, or just knowing of not maybe just them, but in specific, like knowing some of your competitors, and they chose to compromise their values in order to gain something, and then regretted it in the end?
So I never had a chance to speak to competitors who had tested positive or, expressed regret for being caught. That's for sure. I don't know. It just didn't happen. They either left the sport or there was a language barrier. But through my work with WADA, we did absolutely encounter athletes who, either had used performance enhancing drugs and were there to warn other athletes against the health risks, but also the moral, the ethical weight that they had to live with following that. And that was very, very educational and interesting and informative as well. So we did absolutely have contact and engage with athletes who had used performance enhancing drugs, had been caught, and expressed deep remorse and regret for that.
Hmm. Well, and you talk about, I love hearing you talk about how, there's more to sport than just competing to win. Like that's, that's the vehicle, that's our motivation in many ways. But sports can be used in so many ways just to grow as a human being, character, work ethic, integrity, all these sorts of things that can then branch out into other areas in life to help us make an impact in our families, in our communities, all those sorts of things. As an Olympic athlete, to get to that level, obviously you won a lot at a variety of different levels. Numerous gold medals. You're in a variety of Hall of Fames. Is there any award or induction that stands out to you that means a little bit more to you because of your work with WADA and the different the stances you had to take and the battles you had to fight? Do any of those stand out for any particular reason?
Yeah, definitely. I would say being becoming an officer of the Order of Canada was really a standout moment and an incredible honor. And that was, in recognition not only of the Olympic achievements and endeavors, but also my work in anti-doping on an international scale. And that was particularly incredible, I think, and remarkable to me to take a place alongside so many accomplished Canadians who really, really have done outstanding things in their field or, in their careers and professions. And even just being inducted with the other officers and members, and learning about their careers and their achievements and what they had done to contribute to society was just phenomenal. And I really was overwhelmed by that particular award and was so honored. Yeah.
Well, in that, and just you saying that, just something that struck me was, you spent so many years training to be an Olympic athlete, to stand on that podium. But then in the end, and it's still ongoing, that was just a vehicle to put you in a position to where you had maybe your greatest impact. That, you're not on TV accepting a medal, but it's something bigger. That all that training for all those years was leading to something you had no idea about. And I think sometimes we miss that in the short term when we're tempted to compromise our values or cheat, and you didn't do that. And then there was something bigger for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a really great article written in the Toronto Star, and I think it was the notion of clean sport was a fight worth fighting for Beckie Scott, but it came at a cost. And in there's a lot of great pieces in that article, Beckie, where it did detail some of the cost that it came at for you and your family, and just some of the geopolitics and the IOC and the confrontations and the stand that you took with WADA. But one I think was just with a combination of preparation, determination, and sheer moral clarity, Scott transformed WADA's athlete committee into a force based on a simple idea: athletes should be able to compete clean. And I just thought that just spoke, a lot about just what we've talked about here, and just a recognition of, just the moral clarity. The really neat part was you mentioned that just in Canada, we just have a culture, amongst our sport, that this isn't something that we do. And you had the opportunity to represent Canada really on that committee and take that moral fabric with you. And so I thought the article was great. We'll link that article. Some people can read it if they like, inside of from when they listen to the episode. But inside of that, your integrity and your strength took you from being a victim of unfair, competitive field at the very highest level. But it took you to the ranks of, an internationally esteemed advocate for clean sport. And I think what I want to talk about is that you continue to use your platform to do good and to really focus on the values that sport can bring today. And you did so in 2017, you founded, Spirit North. And if you could really tell us about this charitable organization that you founded, and I know you're the CEO of it, and I think it takes a lot of your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin. Yeah. Yeah, I used to tell people I have one foot in the dark side of sport and one foot in the light side of sport here at North. But yeah, so when I retired, I was invited to become an ambassador for a little learn to ski program that was starting up in northern Alberta. And that was in 2009, I believe. And I, for a number of years, traveled up to a variety of Indigenous communities, First Nation and Métis communities, and would spend a day skiing with the kids and then go home. And it was fun, and it was a great time. The kids would have a blast, and then we'd pack up to go home, and everyone would come over and say, "When are you coming back?" And it started to weigh on me that I was coming home to kids who had every opportunity in the world. I had my own life had been shaped, by sport, and these kids, this was the only opportunity that was happening for them. And we weren't going up there very frequently, and so, when the Truth and Reconciliation report came out in 2015, I read the report, I listened to the recommendations, and I just started to feel very strongly that this is a place where we can maybe make a difference and have an impact and build a better future, because there's such an enormous gap between what's available to non-Indigenous kids in this country and what's available to Indigenous kids. And there's no possible reason why I could think of that should be the case. When we know that sport is, so valuable for kids in terms of health, physical, mental health, education, leadership, life skills, personal development, all of that doesn't matter at all if you even, ever step to the start line of a competition. If you have participated in sport, it has changed you most likely in a positive way. And why are we not extending this opportunity to some of the most vulnerable, marginalized kids in the country? It just struck me as so profoundly unjust. And so we started Spirit North. So and I think not unlike my ski career, it was a bit of a gamble in that, I don't know that this is going to work out. I just felt very strongly that this is the right thing to do. And there's, there's power behind this. I know it because my own life was shaped by sport, and why can't we do this for other kids? So we started Spirit North with, 4 little communities in northern Alberta, about 300 kids. And today it's 130 communities and 16,000 kids that are going through the program.
Wow.
So the uptake has been good.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And in those 130 communities, is it just northern Alberta still, or where does it spread now?
Yeah, no. So it's all across the country. So it's now in 6 provinces and territories, and working with Indigenous communities in partnership, with year-round sport and play programs. So it's not just cross-country skiing. It's 43 different sports and activities. It's urban programs. It's downtown Winnipeg to the Beaufort Delta in Northwest Territories. So it's across the country and thriving and succeeding and growing and expanding based on, the very simple premise that all kids should have the right and the opportunity to participate and learn and grow and develop through sport.
So in the sports, 43 different sports and activities, which is great because now you're providing opportunity for, people who have just different passions and want to try to learn how to play lacrosse or soccer, or, I couldn't name 43 activities actually. So I think that's wonderful. And is there anything you're doing inside of the, whether it's a curriculum or something, that you're really intentional about? How do we teach these values in sport? Like, what are we getting out of this outside of the competition, but, helping them translate that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that there's a couple elements inside of the programs that are really designed to help kids make the connection to mental health, actually. So really focused on through games, through play, through activities. So the programs themselves are really designed to be a supportive, enjoyable experience. Like no part of our program development is focused on anything other than kids having a good experience with the program and good, positive outcomes. So, but through games, through skills, there is a link for our coaches and leaders to help kids make that connection, in particular to mental health. So feelings of resilience, confidence, joy, inclusion, teamwork, leadership, those kinds of things. There is a very intentional and focused effort on ensuring that through this activity, through this participating in this program, you're coming away with something that you can take to your classroom, your community, your home life, and you have grown and developed in a positive way through participating and doing this activity the way we've done it and designed it. And I think the other piece that we've really focused on is building capacity in communities. So hiring community members, hiring staff who are Indigenous themselves, and creating that link, the relatability, language, culture, role models, and helping kids see another path for themselves in terms of opportunity, employment, life skills, again, leadership. So that's also been another intentional element of it, for kids to see members of their own community being coaches, leaders, and facilitating these programs.
Yeah. And so this is started in 2017. So we're kind of in your 7th year of it, or maybe 8th year. And are you starting to see even correlation where some of your graduates, some of the Indigenous youth that have graduated from it, perhaps maybe some have actually taken up a sport, maybe they're in college competing, or maybe they're now coaching in the Spirit North program. Are you seeing that kind of happening too?
Yeah, we are. And it's fantastic, because I think it's now we survived COVID, we've survived, the ups and downs of fundraising in the charitable sector. We've been through a lot. It's not easy to run a nonprofit and staff it and do all the things that, get an organization off the ground and then get momentum and keep it running. And this fall, I actually got a call from a teacher or the principal of a school where we had run some of our very first programs. And she let me know that one of the young women who was in the program in the very first years had just been hired back to their school as their land-based learning educator and facilitator. And she just wanted to let me know that, because it was such a success story. She had come through the Spirit North programs, had learned so much, had developed a love for outdoor learning and land-based activity, and was now back hired at the school doing that for the next generation of kids. So, and I always said, if we change one life, if we change the trajectory of one life, it will have been worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's been more than that one life as a student, but it was just such a full circle important moment, and such a wonderful outcome to hear that that this is shifting. It's moving the needle. Kids are coming out of the program changed and transformed and looking at themselves and their opportunities in a new light, and that couldn't be more rewarding. That couldn't have been anything more rewarding to hear.
Well, and those are the stories that, give you a shot in the arm, keep you going, keep you excited to keep going. And so, there's a statistic out there that more and more kids are quitting sports at an earlier age. And so, with your organization, just curious, how do you measure success? Obviously that's one example, are the kids that are coming through the program, staying involved and giving back, which is one. But, we're so again, we live in a culture that's so focused on the scoreboard. Are there other measures of success your organization has to be like, hey, we're making a difference and we want to make sure we're focusing on this and not that?
Yeah, we absolutely do. And, I think very early on, I recognized that we needed to be providing some sort of qualitative or quantitative data in order to attract support for this program. We all know sport for development is real. It's legitimate. It's universally acknowledged, but it was you still have to make a case for support to funders and donors that this is a program worth investing in. And so we have been evaluating actually three different pillars for years. And the first one is physical health, obviously physical and mental health. So we're looking at different indicators of that to evaluate success. Education. So because the program is so largely based and grounded in schools, we're able to collect a lot of data and information from educators around, again, different education indicators like attendance and peer-to-peer relations, willingness to try new things, peer-to-educator relations. And then the third pillar is community. So we are very, very conscious of our role in community and the importance of community and engaging not just the children and youth in the programs, but parents, families, members, elders, knowledge keepers, language teachers, really creating connectivity in community and bringing value to community. So perspective from community, is this a program that they know about, that they enjoy, that they're invited to participate in? That's another pillar we're evaluating and assessing all the time.
Fantastic. Beckie, I just one last question. I got 3 teenage boys, and who are they're all athletes. And an exercise, I was a vice principal a few years ago, and I asked this question of our staff. I was giving a speech at grad, and I asked our staff to share, what would you tell your teenage self that's graduating high school? Now, 30 years ago, however long ago that was, you've experienced all these things, challenges, highs, lows, all this kind of stuff. Knowing what you know now, is there any advice that you would tell your 18-year-old self?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would say, most importantly, especially to teenagers now, and probably to myself even then, to not be afraid to go for it. There's no reason why it shouldn't be you. If you want to make a change, and you want to see, or you want to be successful, or you want to, create something, there's no reason why it shouldn't or couldn't and can't be you. And to not be intimidated or afraid of taking the leap. It's anything is possible, truly, and believe in that, and with that youthful sort of, I guess, worldview, take it on, and don't be, just there's a lot of possibilities and potential out there, and all of it is open to you, and do not be afraid to take it on.
Like that. Why not you? That's good. I like that.
Yeah, Beckie, there's, I know we could dig in deep. You asked me how much time do we have when I asked about WADA. We could ask all kinds of questions, and there's so many things I'd love to, even more just over a coffee. I think you made an impact in when you served and had the opportunity to. You never sat on your hands, it sounds like. As I read the articles and I hear how you spoke up and were courageous, you put yourself out there, and that didn't come without a cost, as was detailed in that Toronto Star. But I can see the passion in you now with Spirit North and what you're doing and giving back, and what you started because a couple of young kids came to you and said, "When are you coming back?" And I think that obviously hit something in your heart. And I don't know if you ever had the idea that it would be this big today. And so congratulations on that. And I just, we'll share a little bit about Spirit North as well, because it's going to be a really fun day, Beckie. I think when you get the chance to go to perhaps the Olympics, or something, and support a Spirit North graduate, and just be there as they compete, and just to encourage them, because why not them?
Why not?
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Justin. No, that means a lot. And it's true. I don't think any of the things I've taken on I ever dreamt would go maybe to the scale or the heights or direction they did, including my career, my foray into sport politics with WADA, and now Spirit North. But it comes back to that advice, for Shane, which is that it's why not you, and I really truly don't think I was anything special. And people outside of me sometimes, "Oh, you're amazing." And I'm like, I am not amazing, actually. I was not talented. I was, but I had conviction. I have conviction, and I just think there needs to be more of it out there, that we should all be standing up for what's right and what's going to make this, us as a collective better. And yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being on our show and giving so freely your time today for us. I know our listeners will just to really appreciate your story and hearing about some of the convictions, and why not you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was great to speak, and I appreciate the thoughtful questions too.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Grit and Growth podcast. We hope that you enjoyed today's guest and the answers that they were able to give and the stories they were able to tell. If you did enjoy today's episode, we'd ask that you would just follow or subscribe to our podcast. It does help us get the word out in our message. Thanks again. Have a great day.